Welcome to Watching Silent Films. My name's YiFeng, and with me is Lily. Hello, Lily.
Hello, YiFeng. Hello.
What we do here on this podcast is watch silent films, talk about it. That's kind of what we do week in, week out. I think I said something like Bob's going to be back in this one. He's not, so probably be back when he's well again. I'll just say that. So when he's back, he's back. So, excuse me. So let's for this particular week, we're gonna talk about. We've watched Victor Seastrom's and there was in 1917, and we'll just kind of dive right in. So, let me see if I can find a quick description of this. I think it's here somewhere.
I got it up. Can I say it?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so Terje, a sailor, suffers the loss of his family through the cruelty of another man during the Napoleonic Wars. Years later, when his enemy's family finds itself dependent on Terje's beneficence, I believe that's how you say it, Terje must decide whether to avenge himself or fight the man. So, it is based on a popular poem written and set in the 1800s by the Norwegian playwright Heinrich Ibsen. And this early film by Victor Seastrom kicks off the quote-unquote golden age of Swedish cinema.
Yeah, I mean, you can also keep going with how he directed The Phantom Carriage, which is huge.
Oh, yeah. He became most known for directing The Phantom Carriage, which I cannot pronounce in the other language, and later as an actor in Bergman's Wild Strawberries, which premiered in 1957.
And of course, Ingmar Bergman is one of the greatest directors of all time, right? I don't know if you're familiar with this work, but
I don't know. I am. I just didn't realize it was Ingmar Bergman, though, for some reason.
It's that Ingmar Bergman guy. He loves to be both on stage, doing a lot of Ibsen stuff, but also, I mean, he runs theater too, and then also do a lot of film. So to him, it's like it's all it's all mishmashed. It's not always totally separate, if you know what I mean. And a lot of his films are actually very, very theater-like, very, very theatrical in many, many ways. Probably his most well-known film is the Seventh Seal.
Do I know that one? I think I've heard of it.
It's like the guy who's a knight during the Crusades playing chess with death. That's the most common imagery that people have. But it's a classic. It's a well-known classic I think in the 50s or something. You know. But Ingmar Bergman's well known for that, as well as many, many other films that he's made over the years. He's done a huge chunk of films. So, always very character driven. Very theatrical. So a lot of love for actors. You know.
Yes, I could see that in this one too.
Yeah.
It does.
But that's Ingmar Bergman, who I think may have just been inspired too by Victor, the guy who directed this one. So I thought that was interesting. So, what are your thoughts about this particular one? I know you have some thoughts about Ibsen, right?
Yes, so I'm familiar with Ibsen's work because I've done a few plays by him. At least I've been in a play of his, Hedda Gabler. I've read several of his plays. I'm actually a fan of Ibsen. He's a very interesting character. Like, I think the deal about him, I don't have his information right in front of me, but one of the biggest scandals that he did is he got a girl pregnant at 16, and I think he was almost 30, so it was a big, big no-no back in the 1800s. So when that scandal came out, he kind of ran off into the fjords and wrote a whole bunch of plays, and then he came back. That was like such a short breakdown. But I really enjoy his translated work. Some people can't stand Ibsen. It's like with any a writer, oh, I hate so-and-so, oh, I love him. I personally like Ibsen's style. He's very character-driven, and I'm not familiar with his poetry. I didn't know he was a poet, but this film is based on the poem. So after filming this, after watching it, I can definitely see where they borrowed some of Ibsen's themes for his characters in the movie. And not to mention, it is... I lost my train of thought. It's that area where he grew up, so that feeling is there too. The type of grit. On a side note, not related to Ibsen, and I haven't seen this film, but it reminded me of The Lighthouse, the Willem Dafoe movie that just came out.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Just from the little clips I've seen of it, I just reminded me of, they reminded me of each other.
Yeah, it's sort of like that particular movie, which is, at this time of this recording, it's about 2020, but I think it came out last
year, and he directed it.
Yeah, last fall, sometime, December, something like that. So it's a black and white movie. It's in a square Academy aspect ratio, 1.33. It's supposed to harken back to old classic movies. I don't know if necessarily these particular ones, but for sure it harkens. It pays homage to the older movies. And it's like a lot of performances by Willem Dafoe and I always call it the Twilight guy, but yeah, I suppose he has a name.
Robert Pattinson.
Yeah, I suppose he has a name. He's gonna be Batman soon, but
he's the Twilight guy.
Yeah, so he's supposed to also well-known acting in that too, and it's supposed to be like this a lighthouse in New England. I want to say I haven't seen it.
It might have been Maine. I'm not 100% sure either.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but you're right. So I think, I haven't done as much with Ibsen as yourself. I just read some of his stuff as high school assignments, and what I understand of his reputation is that he tends to be more depressing, which is a common thing for the Nordic. Any works of art from the Nordic region tend to be kind of depressing. I think most people's criticism, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of my high school friends, he doesn't do that now, I don't think, but when he was in New York City, he actually helped run a Scandinavian / Nordic playhouse, like off Broadway. So of course they do Ibsen, but they specialize in like super like depressing, super down plays. I always joke with him with that, but anyways, it's like, So that's kind of the thing I get out of that. At least that's my bias. But again, I'm not a well-studied Ibsen / purveyor of the performance arts from the Nordic region. You know what I mean? So I'm not like an expert myself by any means. But that's just what I've heard goes on in that region. Due to just the way that the sun and the seasons, the seasonal affective disorder, where like if you don't see the sun for like 6 months out of the year, you tend to get depressed, and that's why these artists always create these super depressing relational stories of things. But
yep.
But if you guys, I don't know if you looked into his particular relationship to this particular story, talking about Ibsen. He wrote this epic poem about this this Terje sailor who, through the blockade of the Napoleonic Wars, went to get food for his family and was thrown in jail. And by the time he came back, his wife and daughter died, but then he later on rescues somebody from like the sea from certain death, and turns out the person he rescued was the original captain that captured him and threw him in prison and caused him to essentially lose his wife and daughter. And so he was like set on avenging himself by making a widow.
Making him a widower.
Yeah, exactly. And then he sort of came to an epiphany of that's not who I am, and also the little kid, I guess it was the daughter, I think?
That's what I was a little confused about, because I almost thought when he went to give the little girl a kiss, it was his family. Because I don't know, like, even though he had looked at the woman, coddling the little girl, I was just like, wait, is it actually his wife and daughter? And they didn't die. The guy just kind of
No, it was the
stole
captain's
him.
wife and daughter.
Yeah,
is how
but
the
I was
story
thinking
goes,
it
yeah.
was Terje's wife and daughter. Like, they didn't die. He just kidnapped them. I don't know. That was my thought then.
Yeah, this actually brings up another point about just the way the film language is continuing to evolve, right? And sometimes in things like this, it's really hard to discern very clearly just from film itself without any context, which is why, I know I keep harping on this, but it's true, is that without that context, you would be lost, right? You'd be like, is it his own fucking kids? Or is it like the captain? So like, that's why I said, like, if you read the original story, the original poem by Ibsen, the original story, and also what was inspired, and just the context of how this film was get made, then you understand that that's not what it's about. It's about this person trying to potentially take revenge, but he didn't, and he let them go, and they kind of sail off into happy ending, and at the end, they even stopped by, like the whole family, wife and kids and whatever. They came back and said, "Hey, thanks for saving us." Later on, and he the story just ends with him going, "Oh yeah, that's cool." That's it. I just found it interesting that Ibsen himself, like you said, during that period of time, moved to the fjords and befriended this. This is the story behind the epic poem: is that he befriended this. They call it pilot, but like sailor, same idea. Like, he befriended this person who has a vast amount of stories about his time during the Napoleonic Wars. And so the rumor is that this is actually about him. Like, that person that you befriended, they became really good friends, actually. Later on, he would come and visit in time. So when he wrote this, he would complete the poem later on. He didn't write it like he had the idea for the poem. I don't think he completed it during his stay at the fjord. Then he moved back somewhere else. But the point is, so he got inspired by this person. It's almost like he's just writing things that he was saying, and then kind of distilling it into his own art too.
That is very interesting indeed.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a specific detail that this other person who is like, he didn't lose his wife and daughter, I don't think, but he just has so many stories of his time during this actual real life event. Now, I don't think this movie was like a documentary. It was just a story that he created off of some of the stories that this sailor person told, right? Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like a true to life, but it's heavily inspired by it. And all his grandkids, even to this day, will be like, yeah, that one time Ibsen was BFFs with our granddad, father. They did this, and it was like, yeah, heavily inspired. And they always claim their families claim to fame with Ibsen, So it's like legend. It continues to be passed down even to this day, right?
Well, apparently so.
I had a chance to actually. I think I linked it to you guys, and I guess I'll put it in the show notes as well. But there is a translation of the original epic poem.
Ooh.
So when you have time, it's actually just.
Because I'll read it since,
Yeah, it's about 43 stanzas or whatever you call that. It's only a couple, 2 or 3 pages.
Probably
It's not
stanza.
super long. It's not really long. But one of the things that was interesting was, I can't remember where I read this now in my research, but somebody said something like, in order for you to truly experience this poem, you have to read it in the original language. Like, what's translated now, it's lost. All of the very, the rhyming, the texture of the language.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of, like, the original language. And, of course, we don't speak what he wrote it in. So that's the best thing we can get is the translation. Now, in the short movie, I say short, it's 55 minutes. In the movie, it actually lifts the translation from this translation. This translation's by John Northam. And so the intertitles actually lifts directly out of this poem. The translation of this poem, rather. You know what I mean? But the pilot from the Howl Island, he actually His name is Sven. He was good friends with Sven, and he was like, I think he was running a pharmacist at that time. Ibsen. And he became really good friends with this guy, who's kind of a former sailor, and he actually made a painting of him too. So like, I love how these. I keep stressing this point last few weeks, but like, some of these directors, they're like Renaissance people, Renaissance men. They don't just do one thing, right? They do several things really well.
Mm.
And he did this painting of his good friend Sven in 1849. It's incredible. Like you could paint like that. You could write epic poetry and write plays. I mean, sometimes you're just like, wow.
Yeah, it is amazing that some people just have all the talent.
I know.
And then
crazy.
they just build themselves up from it.
It's crazy. So anyway, back to this director though. He was born in Sweden, but I think he actually his family moved to Brooklyn and he moved back to Sweden when he was 7. So he has actually American roots. I mean, some of it was pretty interesting after his mom died, and he actually started acting instead of directing. And in time, he got into directing. And he actually got an offer from Louis B. Mayer from all those MGM studios. And so he made a number of features in that time. He directed stars such as Greta Garbo, John Gilbert, Leland Geesh, Lil Lon Chaney, Norman Shearer. So just many, many films, silent before even the talkies. So when he was done with his English career, I guess he ended up moving back to Sweden. He directed a couple things, but then he started acting in the local theater. Excuse me, because again, there seems to be something from that region. Again, I'm not from that region, but it is my understanding that folks from that region, they love theater, and so he goes back and he starts performing, acting in a theater company. So, and that's how he started. That's how he was, hired by Ingmar Bergman later on to be in Wild Strawberries. I just thought it was interesting. So that's the career of the director, and then what do you think of the short itself? The not just the story, but sort of the film itself. Was it effective? Was it hard to watch without context? Or
I didn't think it was that difficult without much context. The only part was just the child. I thought it was very straightforward. Well, I might be wrong, because it just seems all of a sudden, he's in the boat, and then the guys come and just, upheave his life, and then they take him hostage. But as it says, he's kind of captured during the Napoleonic War, so of course they're going to take prisoners. So, I mean, you kind of have to work it down and figure it out yourself. I guess that's the only other part that seemed a bit confusing. Because once the war is over, then they're all free. Because they're no longer prisoners of war. I like this movie. It's a little different, but you get to see another world because of it. Because it is filmed in another country. So, despite all the technology being the same, really our stories are the same too, no matter where we come from.
Absolutely agree. I mean, it's sometimes like, I don't know if you've heard the saying. I don't know who said this, but the more specific sometimes it is, the more universal it becomes, or something. And so Ibsen, even though he created this story that was so specific, and then this director took it upon himself to even make it even more, I think, personal for the way that he adapted this, that some of the themes became more universal. But I actually found this film, both the poem and the movie, to be actually very similar to Dante's Inferno that we watched a few podcasts ago. Because that was also an adaptation of an epic poem. right?
Right, that is right.
I just found it so incredibly just fascinating and maybe moving that some of the earliest works adapted poetry, like of all things.
Mm.
That was uh, I forgot what the context of, but I remember in high school the English teacher said that it's the way that language. There's several types of language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if I'm repeating this in the if we've done this in the
No, it's
previous.
good to hear again and again.
Yeah, if I've said it in previous podcasts, I apologize. So I often forget things, so I have to bring it back up over again. But but he taught us that the way languages communicate between people or humans is that there are different types of cultures of languages that are used, and so the lowest type is kind of just like WWF, like just basically barely caveman, and you can kind of communicate, but there's not a lot of vocabulary and a lot of words, and that's called the low culture, and often is like if people are in very far off places that haven't received education and they haven't built up their literacy. And so that's the low culture in the sense that they don't have a lot of vocabulary to communicate what their feelings are. But they can. So that's the low culture. The second one is called the pop culture. And pop culture is just popular culture, like what is the most common things that we use today. Like you and me, generally speaking, use, average number of words to talk about certain things. And that we communicate, we use a certain language that we communicate with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just the popular language or the pop culture. Now, the next culture is called the power culture. Power culture. And the power culture is like business people, like lawyers or academics. And sometimes if you read their published paperwork or the lawyer draft fine print stuff, they have specific ways of using specific words, sometimes really long words to describe certain situations. And they have very industry-specific terms they use, right? And so that's what power culture is, like something that is specific to people in power. I mean, you hear that with politics too, right? Like when politicians are trying to be like, don't worry about the coronavirus. It's just we've seen this before and it's under control. Like, and these like words like control, words like assurances that everything will be fine. Like these languages are used by people in power to communicate things, right? And so that's like the power culture. That's another step above popular culture, which is what most people live in. Most people don't often use power. Sometimes they'll go into power culture, but more often than not, people are in pop culture status. And then there's the final level is called the high culture. High culture is like works of classic literature and art and epic poetry. And the highest form is always poetry. Because poetry is the way that you can communicate not just flowery languages and stuff, but it's the way that you can communicate with the most sort of meaning and intent and symbolism and thoughts and ideas and concepts. It's the highest form that human beings can communicate with each other, no matter what language they use, right? So that's the high culture. And I feel like these early films, like the Inferno film, Dante Inferno, as well as this one, we're adapting films using high culture languages. It's incredible, the intertitles, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So that's what I love about these early films, is that right from the get-go, we've got these amazing directors who are taking works of classic poetry, narrative poetry, epic poetry, and turning them into like just these amazing pieces of work, Go ahead.
I was going to say, it doesn't seem like, well, unless you really delve into a script to see their inspiration, it seems as if people aren't adapting so many. I mean, well, there's tons of films now that are adapted off of books, like a big chunk of them are. But poetry, not so much. Just, or even like song lyrics, taking something that someone else wrote, a brief 2-minute thing, and turning it into an entire story. That's something we don't seem to find very often. Or at least not anything someone's willing to put on the credits as inspiration for.
It's hard.
Yeah.
I think people are comfortable with the power culture, which is the language that they're familiar with, or even pop culture. And so most of our films today, or even, heck, even low culture, like Adam Sandler movies,
Yeah.
they're not really even popular culture. They barely make sense, right? So we got most
sometimes.
of that. Yeah. But I love just the way it's framed. Everything that is framed in this movie is the mise-en-scene is incredible. And this is before even the term was coined. Like in the beginning and towards the end, which is like a flashback or flash forward, like the man against the sea seems to be a recurring image of Terje, the main character. Like, while the poetry does it justice, it evokes some imagery if you read the original work from Ibsen, but then like to show that on film as a narrative, and Victor does it so amazingly with just like putting a lone figure, and like I think there was even one scene where Terje was like shaking his fist against the sea.
Yep, he definitely was.
Yeah, it was like this incredible image of like basically shaking your fist at God. That whole it's a archetype, right? Of like, I'm angry at you. Why are you doing this? And I feel like that, like it's literally in the film that he's doing that, right? And I thought that was really striking when you could frame something like that. I also found it interesting that whatever the sea was doing was reflecting the inner turmoil of Terje. I don't know if you noticed that. So if it's calm,
I think I might have.
He's calm.
Noticed it. Yeah.
But if the sea is violent, that's what he's feeling. He was just being tossed and fro, and it just, especially towards the end with the wife and kids and stuff of the captain. The whole like it was like a storm almost,
Yeah.
So I thought that was really well done. That the nature itself reflects kind of the inner life of Terje. And when he was being chased by I want to say the British soldier, the frigate, and it was when Terje went to get food for the wife and kids, and he came back with bounty, and the soldiers from Black Hills chasing him. That whole editing sequence was pretty. I mean, it's melodramatic, granted, but was just really well done for a movie in 1917, right?
Yeah, I thought so too.
Like a chase sequence almost. And then finally, there's around the 38 mark when towards the end when they're trying to rescue the captain and the people off of that ship that's run aground or something. I think it's run aground, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a specific shot where it's looking out the side of the ship, and there's 3 crew trying to pull together a mast, I think, that fell side or something off the side of the ship.
Yeah, the mast falls off.
And I thought that was a really brilliant shot. Just the juxtaposition of what just the angle itself was incredible. So I really love the composition of the shot. The technical aspect of this film is just an amazing piece of work.
Yeah, because they were filming on boats. At one point, I almost thought it was a kind of green screen. Obviously not, because the way the water was thrown at Terje from the side almost seemed a little too unrealistic. Like how they would do in a 60s sitcom, like throw some water on the actor.
Well, I'm sure they did that,
yeah.
right? to make the drama. That's the whole point, is to raise the stakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just that they're already doing that. Right? They didn't have to wait until the 1960s. They're doing it now, right? The 19-teens. So.
Yeah, you're right. They probably had another boat next to him.
Something like that. Or maybe they were on sounds. I don't really know how it was done. Like many early silent films, it's really hard to get behind the scenes because for the most part, they're like, the film itself is lost. But even then, it's like, to get any paperwork for the film, It depends on if they kept really good paperwork. If they did, then there might be some behind the scenes stuff left. But still, it's just to even have this. And this is a rumor, like, there's might be a longer cut, too. It's supposed to be 77 minutes, maybe?
I read
from 45 or to 77. So we don't know if this is the all the complete footage, you know? Unfortunately, that's the nature of silent films. Probably for 1920s. A big chunk of them, you know, didn't survive as a whole. It would just be like bits and pieces of it, I think. So we don't know for sure. But yeah, it felt to me like more like a fable, like Inferno. It's less almost a narrative story, but more just like a Arabian Night fable, you know.
Except in Norway, but yeah.
Same idea, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, any other parting thoughts?
I don't know. I can't think of anything else for this particular film, but it's a good one. Maybe if someone can compose some better music for it, it'd be even more epic, but
oh yes,
it's definitely worth another watch.
Yeah, with better music. I did find a copy with some music. It wasn't great, but it was better than no music.
Mm-hmm.
All right, folks. With that, we're gonna wrap up today's podcast. We'll be back again next week, talking about Alski Boucher's filmography. I think.
Woohoo!
Maybe all of it. Not all of it all next week, but just over the next few weeks. So let's go forward with that. Thank you, Lily, and thank you, listeners. You can find more of our stuff at watchingsilentfilms.wordpress.com. That's watchingsilentfilmsplural.wordpress.com. You can also email us with your comments, suggestions, thoughts at watchingsilentfilms@gmail.com. And again, please always leave us a rating or a review, ideally on Apple Podcasts or any of the platforms that you use to find us. And thank you again, Lily. Thanks, listeners, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you all. Goodbye.